Welcome to Mind Over Marketing, the show where we break down the marketing, sales, and mindsets that separate the winners from the wannabes. The host, Todd Starr, has been on the front lines of business, sales, and marketing for himself and for his clients for the last 10 years. Todd says, "I believe that success in business isn't about doing more, it's about seeing differently." So today, we're getting inside the mind of somebody who truly thinks differently. They've built a successful business, but more importantly, they've had to outthink, outsell, and outmarket their competition to get to where they are. And we can all learn from their wins, but more importantly, from their failures to make our businesses better.
Awesome. So thanks for joining us today on Mind Over Marketing. Really excited to be joined by Vaughan today. Slightly different theme to the episode, but I think as we dive into some of the questions, we'll get some really, really good insight that a primarily business audience can take away, and we can learn quite a lot from this man. So Vaughan, first, thanks for joining me. And do you want to first tell the audience, in your own words, who you are and what you're up to?
Yeah, and look, the pleasure is all mine, bro. So thank you for reaching out. I'm really looking forward to this. In terms of look, I'll probably just drop right in terms of I'm a proud father of two sons. I'm at a point in my life where I'm really interested in what's going on in the world around us, and I think that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I've got a background that is mainly corporate and have worked in environments, and so I think that where we probably have a commonality is understanding markets and how people respond to them. However, I'm now find myself in the prison system and looking at the issues in there, and whilst I feel privileged to be there, trust me, at times I feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew. So it's kind of, that's why I'm finding, I think today will be a great release to have a bit of a cordial with someone outside of the prison system.
Yeah, awesome. So how did you, maybe if we start in a real simple way, like what exactly are you doing in the prison system?
Yeah, so I work with the reintegration of prisoners out of the system and back into society. I am based in a house block that has a cultural focus unit. That's a Māori focus unit. So there's 60 men in there, predominantly who will whakapapa Māori, but not exclusively. We have men who want to be in that unit too. So that for me really rang my bell when I got in there and got the opportunity to work in that unit and look at a lot of the societal issues that face Māori. And that's been a massive eye-opener for me to be involved in that.
So the objective of your role or the time you're spending there is what? Is it rehabilitation? Is it learning and insight so that you can change some sort of systemic stuff, or what's the primary objective?
I think there is only one KPI, one objective, and that is to reduce reoffending, reduce recidivism. Because if we look at the societal issues around Māori, we seem to be very, very capable of getting arrested and then rearrested. And and to be frank, I don't say this jokingly, propping up and keeping the prison system alive. So for people who don't make up 1/5 of the population to be the majority of prisoners, certainly is nothing to be proud of. And so it's that hopeful moment that when someone leaves, whether they're in the unit that I work in or any other part of the prison system, we ain't going to see them again. That's really where the buck stops.
So with the people that you're working with in there, what's a kind of common thread in terms of how they found themselves in that position?
Yeah, that's a really good question because how people find themselves in there, it's almost like from the day they are born, there are some that they're on a pipeline that is going to end badly, which means probably ending up in prison. There are others that make mistakes like a misstep. And you genuinely look at them and you go, you have a family that you've let down to go back to. You've got some sort of structure outside of the wire. There are many men in there, though, that they have absolutely nothing. So the only bed and the only meal and the only roof they're ever going to get over their head is probably that cell that they're in tonight. That's the part that's the hard part. because it's all very well to release them, but it's two fingers crossed and toes when they leave, and you're thinking, gee, I hope this one works this time. And too much of that and not enough of the other, where people actually do have a family that may be supporting them, or at least something to go back to when they get out.
So what if you think about if I think about a typical scenario, I can imagine, parents not super involved, maybe not even present, you know, abusive, or drugs and alcohol are playing a role in how they're parenting. And then what's the sort of mindset that creates as a bit of a common theme that you've seen, right? Is it lack of feeling like they deserve better? Is it just fundamental inability to process information logically, and kind of, you know, uh, based on the programming that they've had, like they're at the bottom and they never get out of it and they don't deserve anything? Or what's the mindset, that
Yeah, yeah. Well, I
Mhm.
think if you try and look for a pattern or a commonality, because there is, many different types of prisoner. If we just go back to what type of offence was it that landed them, in the can, and you will range from, a lot of people know the optic of the gang members that may be in prison. You might have the murderer, the rapist, the underage sex offender, and so then you're looking at how did they arrive at that point where it's all gone wrong, and the lack of the role model and being born into circumstances completely out of their control. So every one of them, for probably a few seconds after leaving the womb at birth, were innocent, and then their environment starts to have an influential component, and you start to look at that. You read the background. Look, the only commonality that I can glean so far: drugs and alcohol. That being there, unmanaged, poor education around it. I don't decry anybody that likes to have a drink, but there is a difference between knowing what you're doing and it actually poisoning, your behavior.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's it. I think that makes me think, though, of like why then the drugs and alcohol, right? If I think about my personal circumstance, I feel like um people that I know that regularly engage in drugs and alcohol, or that I have known over the years, are using that as a tool to hide from a painful reality. So it's like, whilst that's prevalent in terms of negative behavior and poor decision making, it's like the systemic scenario that they're running away from exists, and the drugs and
Yeah.
alcohol mask or help
Yeah.
distract you, help you get through every day. But it's actually like that's there without the drugs and alcohol. That's just an easy mask, I guess, to hide from it. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that these are some of the things, like when you say that, I can't get over how naive I was when I went into the prison system, and then you start to see close up, how ugly that it really is. And you will see genuine examples of offenders who are actually, alcohol fetal syndrome kids. And then you might think first, the first thing is, well, what a terrible mum. But then you look at the mum and think, well, what was she doing to try and, numb herself or whatever? And what circumstances was she born into? So going back to that innocence they have when they are born, their normal is that. Now, my normal's not that, and I don't think yours is either. And so therefore we look at our family and what's around us. Our normal may be a cup of coffee in the morning and yada yada da. Their normal is survival. That's coping. And so I don't believe, and this is why I don't like calling gang members gang members. They don't see themselves as gang members. They see themselves as part of something that probably gave them a meal and the only protection that they ever had. Sure, it all goes wrong at some point for most of them that are in prison now. But so going back to having a real understanding of how complicated the societal mess of many of the people that are in prison. And, probably 3, 4 months into it, I started to look at it and go, my God, I'm not confident that a lot of these people can be let out, because hand on heart, and this is what the parole board must deal with when they stare into the eyes of a prisoner and go, okay, you've done your time, you've done your programs, you've ticked all the boxes, but in their heart, are they going, yep, he's ready to get, or she's ready to get reintegrated back into society? I don't think that that would be a real common feeling There's that sense of, gee, I just hope this goes well. I saw something in the paper yesterday about, a murder by someone who was out, on parole. Uh, yeah, and I look at that and go, yep, that's the sort of thing that, first and foremost, you know, we can talk about prisoners, and I talk about the societal thing for Māori, but first and foremost is a safe society, a safe community. So I know that politicians bang on about it and make it a campaign trail thing, but at a more genuine and an authentic level, we do want to be able to walk down the street and not come across someone that's going to assault us or try and sell our kids drugs or whatever. So that part of it is never lost on me in terms of when I drive home at night and I leave the prison, because this is just another thing, Todd. When you're in a prison for the day, it is like being on another planet. And one of the biggest things that I realized was I was exhausted after a day in there. And I thought, I've done far harder jobs than this, or so I thought. But it's actually the negative energy of that. Everybody, I'm in front of 60 men for hours in a day, and each of them are talking to you. The transactional energy is that if I've got positive things to say or supportive things to say, I'm not taking those back. What I'm getting back is someone who has had a life of trauma, they've got some issues, and they just look to people like you and I as like a life raft. Is there some way we can get out of this? And that's where the exhaustion comes from. It's an energy drain. And that's why I respect a lot of people who keep going back to prisons, and no matter how hard it is to bang your head against the brick wall and think you're making a difference, keep doing it. Sometimes it's very much a thankless task.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it, to think about that amount of negative energy. If you think about I almost feel bad to, I'm given like dissed recently by somebody, which is like a session to go and have like a what's it called? Oh, I'm gonna have to edit this bit out. Oh, what's isolation, like a isolation tank. So you go in a tank of water, and it shuts off all your senses. There's no sound or light in there, and you basically float on water that's heated to the temperature of your skin, and it's like a deeply relaxing thing, right? Because somebody heard me say I was pretty stressed the other day with some work, and then they dropped this in the mailbox as like a nice gift. It's like the juxtaposition to think that like my life is really not that stressful when you're talking about negative energy there and being locked basically in a small square box around murderers, rapists, and
Yeah.
the most kind of like deranged psychological people in society, effectively, that haven't been able to assimilate, have had horrendous traumatic upbringings, and just like see violence or impulsive behavior as just a default program. And then like we're sitting here talking, and I'm gonna like go do a nice little bit of meditation and like get all spiritually centered. It's just like I cannot I can try to empathize, but I can never understand. You can never really understand what that must be like to just like absolutely have an absence of hope and just like do shit to feel something, or to and this is why I understand a gang mentality. I can understand it at a human psychological level, that like these are other people just like me that get it, and we're like at least together in this. And it might be mugging an old lady or selling a bunch of meth on the street to a pregnant teenager, but whatever it is, that's like we're together in it, and we understand each other. It's like I can get the camaraderie, I can understand the sort of brotherhood or the connection. If
Yeah, and in terms of that, the string of kōrero we've just had, don't edit that out. In terms of the karma card, the well-being component, prior to going into the prison system, I was that dude that did the whole, harden up, buttercup. It's like play through your injuries, the whole sort of, I'm all good. And we know enough about that, with mental health and the anxiety people put on themselves and the pressures that not necessarily need to be there. However, about 2 years ago, I was invited to go to a First Nation Indian sweat lodge. and that's like a teepee and a hot rocks, and it's probably hard to describe here, but I guess the karma card, when you brought that up, it reminded me that when I was invited to go to it by a very dear friend, and out of a sense of loyalty, I thought I would support it. And then I was kicking myself afterwards that I was kind of rolling my eyes and thinking, oh, here we go, a mental health session. The feeling of neutrality, to be in a high heat environment and complete darkness, and where you're actually trying to cope with the intense heat, but what you do is you put yourself in a space where you're neutral. That was the only way I was going to get through that, in terms of having not dealt with something like that before. So whatever it is that spins your wheels, that makes you just go out of gear and do something that is getting close to understanding what healing is very real. And so I this is what I saw being in part of a cultural focus unit. So with the Māori prisoners that I worked with, one of the most touching moments I'd had this year was I was sitting with one of them, and obviously I can't mention names or anything with the Privacy Act and the way the prison system works, and he's in there for a long time. And he said to me, I actually said to him, what is the biggest benefit that you got out of being invited to join the Māori Focus Unit? And he said to me, it was the first place in his life, and he's in his late 40s, that he ever felt loved. And he said, and in terms of love, he was surrounded by men that supported him when he was down and when he was up, because prisoners are incredibly intuitive. They can look at you and they know the vibe. It's almost like, they can look at what sort of night you had last night or whatever. And when he said that, he looked down at his lunch where we were, sitting and sharing kite together. And he was almost in tears, but he absolutely meant that. And it just stopped me dead, that in his life, having to go to prison and be surrounded by other Māori, feeling connected, and that was an eye-opener. So coming back to that karma card, however you take your medicine, who cares if it's working, do it, although I don't recommend going to prison to get it.
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. It's like there's ways to do that, but I can that makes me really. I don't have. It's not sympathy, but it's more than empathy. So I don't know where it lands, but like that, what you're talking about there in terms of an absence of love. Like I can hypothetically get that. I can understand in my mind, like, and that's literally an absence of love, right? When you're born, majority of us, I'm sure, were lucky enough to like have a genuine cuddle of absolute love and kisses and photos and family coming round, and like I can imagine the scenario where kids are just born and like mums can't even look after the kid, and you're just removed from that, and you don't even get that from day one, from the very formation of your first breath and your brain development, like completely stripped of that. So how can we as a general society that we're fortunate enough to have that, and siblings and support and guidance and ideas and holidays and connection and all that kind of stuff, with the removal of that, and you're going through like a foster care system, and you're thrown around and you have no self value, and and nobody really loves you and looks after you and shows you the way, you're just completely fucking out there on your own.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
in how can how can we possibly not look at that through a lens of empathy and understanding? Because everybody would be like that. It's not there's not like one prisoner here that's done this. This is how it works if you don't have that.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah, yeah.
so,
And that sort of pipeline from the time being born, and I use the word pipeline because when in prison, I prefer to use the word roadmap. That one day, and I'll often, have a look at the file and see when the prisoner is going to be released, and it might be 1, 2, 3 years down the track, and start to talk about the navigation out and the day that the door at the receiving office is opened and you're able to exit and leave the prison for the very last time, hopefully. But so that's a roadmap out. The pipeline in is that often you don't know what you don't know, and one set of circumstances leads to being arrested. I absolutely, that, like this word love, and I'm a guy in my early 60s, and I would say that in terms of giving love and understanding in my life was probably quite primitive, even though I was brought up by parents who absolutely loved me, kept me safe. So that's privilege. That was absolute privilege. And I'm surrounded by many people where there was probably an absence of that. Not all, but yeah, there's a high degree of an absence of that, and just underestimating what a healthy society really is. I'm sure you've seen it somewhere, but there's that saying, something along the lines that a child that's not looked after will burn the village down to keep itself warm. In terms of the detachment and the lack of respect for something, it's very easy to commit a crime when those emotions just are not there.
And surrounded by people who enable that. Because now you talk about roadmap home, it's like, where are they going?
Yeah,
But straight back to the fucking block, built whatever area. I watch a lot of these like hood vlogs and stuff. I'm just generally interested in every level of society. I'm interested in high net worth individuals with rock solid mentalities that achieve great things, and I'm interested in like the bottom of society and how drugs and alcohol and addiction cause a destabilized end of society. So I'm just, but you go back there, and who are you surrounded by? Like
right.
negative pressure, influence from others who and then you need money, and you're 16 weeks to fucking try and get a benefit or a food card or something. So you're straight back into the shit, right? Where it's like, you come to us tonight and do this, and then you have 3 grand in your pocket tomorrow. Like, that's alluring. That's like, you're desperate. You don't really care about the prison. You've just come out of it for 2 years. You can do another 6 months if you have to, but this is 3 grand and I need the fucking money. And I want to go, so it's like, it's like a whole, it's fucking so hard to fix. Like, how do you fix this?
Yeah, and I think that one of another learning curve that I've had is that how much people don't understand about what the prison system is. It's probably in their mind a big warehouse where people go and they're kept until they maybe are ready to be released, if at all. So that's about the level of understanding most people have with a prison system. The problem with it is a lot of them do have to come back out into society, and when they come back out into society, the bridge between the work they've done on themselves, if they have, while they're in prison, and coming back out really isn't there. So that roadmap is full of potholes. And sorry, what was that, Todd?
I'm disagreeing with you.
Yeah. And so that's what I see, is because many times, when you work in a prison, you will see who's leaving and who's arriving. So the night before you log off, I'll have a look and go, oh, who's arriving at the prison tomorrow? So many times you'll see a name that was released only a few months before, and they only made it out there for XYZ time before they were sleeping under a bridge and then stole a basket of groceries or whatever from the local supermarket, and bang, they're back in there.
The thing with this is, like, if you think about, there's two versions of this, right? There's two perspectives of this. Like, there's lots of, if I think of the other end of this, busy CEO is very successful, lovely life, that need a break, right?
Yeah.
And that are burning out, right? That are making negative decisions in their version of life, that need time away. Like, their time away would be at a retreat, like what you said, or it would be some kind of respite facility, or they'd get a lovely Airbnb in Bali and have a couple of weeks off with their family, and they'd think about stuff, and they'd reprioritize, and they'd go back to their default values, and they'd rest, and they'd get ready to go again. And then you think about the other side of this, like, the decisions were made to get someone in a prison cell, and then that is actually valuable time that could be used for reflection, right? But you have to know how to get there in your mind. And what that should be is like an opportunity to like reprogram them, where you go back to the drawing board in terms of, you've got nothing else to do but fucking sit here and think. And that actually is a luxury in today's. I'd love to. I try and spend an hour every morning to do a bit of meditation after my walk, and I do a bit of journaling, and I try and. But even finding an hour in my busy schedule is hard, right? So it is actually a luxury in some way to have that amount of time where you don't have to think about rent, you don't have to think about bills, you just get fed, watered, and you sit here and think, right? So that is actually something. If I could have 3 months off now where I didn't have to pay bills and feed my kids, and someone just goes, here you go, just sit in here and like just think about everything and read some books and upskill. In some ways, that on its own is a luxury. Obviously, when you're surrounded by the horrible shit that's in there and the environment and you can't leave and the lack of freedom, it's different. But I think it's almost like that's an opportunity to reprogram. But if your default thinking and mindset is negative, then you sit in there in that box and you are fueled by negative energy, by vengeance and revenge and like building connections. And how do we get, like, when I get back to the street, this is what I'm going to do. And like, it's not going to be one of like genuine introspective self-reflection. And where I'm leading to with that is like what your thinking is on psychedelic drug use. I looked online I've watched a ton of stuff on PTSD in soldiers and veterans doing, ketamine and psilocybin mushrooms and things, and it's like resetting them. It's completely like resetting their brain and their basic operating system. Like, is there any discussion of that in the prison system? Is there any like knowledge of that? I know you've got to first want to actually fix that, and that's a whole nother thing we spoke about last time around possible sort of corruption. Prison's a business, and you want offenders in there because you're making money. But is there any like programs or anything that look into sort of?
Yeah, in terms of just hearing you out on that, I think sadly the short answer is definitely not. But then what I will say, particularly in and around psychedelics, because there are some innovative ideas being trialled, or it appears to be being trialled by the prison system, such as Vaughan Māori. There is some medicinal stuff going on there, but just getting down to the brass tacks of the psychedelics and use of it, and it's definitely emerging. So I would say it's a matter of time before it will be looked at, because one of the other mind-blowing aspects of the prison system is just how many of the prisoners are on medication, and I'm talking heavy medication, not Panadol, that they really are, and a lot of that is in and around the PTSD and traumatic experiences, or what, the list is long. And the pharmaceutical side of the prison system is massive, and I think in terms of a broadening of thinking of ways to deal with some of the more troublesome cases, because what we do have in the prison system is it is also New Zealand's. This is my thinking, not anyone else's. It is New Zealand's biggest mental health ward. Most men in the prison system are traumatized to some degree for whatever reasons, and if you look at the societal support, the support for mental health, there isn't any, right? We have the Mason clinics and we have places, but most prisons might dedicate a wing to prisoners that are struggling in that regard, but it is way outstripped by the demand. And so the number of psychologists, psychiatrists, and resources for that, just a drop in the bucket versus what could be there. We just do not have the resource. The common question I get asked is, have you looked at the Norwegian prison system? And I have, and very closely. And but they have a thing called the North Sea oil, pumping billions or trillions into their economy every year. They can try stuff. And it's not to say that we need to go mining to pay for our prison system, but the key point is that we'd be living beyond our means if we did what Norway was doing. But just quickly coming back to, I still believe, don't edit out your karma card part, or if you do, the karma card and what you mentioned about, I would love to take 3 months out, and I would love to. Probably the safest we ever were, right, was when we were in our mother's womb. And so your reference about being in the flotation, cylinder, or in a, completely immersed sweat lodge, it's like a fetal position where you are safe in the womb and you can just basically huddle up and go, I don't have any pills to pay. I don't have anyone to talk to. I'm in this state, which is just an incredibly beloved space, a space of love. And that's, the reality is people will be watching this and going, well, I just can't do that, man. I've got to still put gas in the car, food on the table, and pay the kids' school fees or whatever. But that is that point that we all started from that point. We were all in the womb at some point. And I think the yearning for the safety of the womb is something that a lot of men, they probably can't articulate it into those words, but I sense that commonality of I wish I could just leave all this alone. So they don't want to exit this earth. So it's not a suicidal thought. It's a thought of just wanting to get to a space of neutrality.
Yeah, I do think, there's ways to expedite that. Like, I've not done this, and I want to do it, but I'm deliberately waiting until my kids are a bit older. But I want to go to Peru and do an ayahuasca ceremony. I've always wanted to. I've been intrigued by it for probably 12 years. Like most people, heard Joe Rogan talking about it years ago on a podcast about DMT, and me and my partner have discussed for years. She wants to do it. We both had interest in upbringings for very different reasons, but I want to wait. I had somebody tell me that it changes you so much that you shouldn't really do it with young kids because for them it will be the same experience as if they lost a parent, like come so differently that they almost like will have grief basically at 10 years old because your dad never comes back how he was. So I want to wait until they're a bit older and then I'll go and do it. But like the speed at which that resets you. And even when I did this float thing the very first time, I had a really, really weird experience. And I'm the biggest skeptic with this. I used to be. I've definitely changed. I used to be like, what I'm about to say to you, if I'd heard myself say this 10 years ago, I'd have punched myself in the face. But I had a weird experience where I basically went, you're in this float tank. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah, I am. Yep.
Epsom salt and you're floating and the water's heated to the same temperature as your skin. So you do feel like you're falling. And I kept touching the top of the lid to try and, remind myself that I wasn't like falling in space. Then I realized that's the point, right? So every time you snap out of it and keep doing that, you're staying closed. And the more you let go and realize actually you are just a consciousness in a jar that we call a skull, and you do just let go of more layers, you get to true insight. And I basically realized, and I wouldn't say I'm spiritual or religious, but I realized there has to be some kind of creative force, because what happened in my experience there is I visualized basically becoming a sperm and going inside my dad's nutsack. I'm in his balls, and I'm like, that's where I came from, right?
Yeah.
That's what. And then he became a sperm when it's up my granddad's nuts. A really clear visual of like when you remove any like crassness or joking or like sexual nature to that, like that is just biology, right? That's and when you break it down to just scientific level, like there's a through line of how much I love my son and how much my dad loves me and how much my granddad loved my dad, all the way back. And that had to have started somewhere. There was no way that just started with me. So there is a through line of like care and love all the way back to some form of creative force, wherever that's evolution or by design. But what I realized then in this conversation is that, and I'm fortunate to have that, right? Because my dad loved me and I love my son. That gets broken for a lot of these guys you're talking about. There'll be love that would take them all the way up to that generation. And then like there isn't love through either drug addiction or lack of even being around, right? Lack of being involved in the kid's life. So that there isn't any like through line to them. That hasn't continued. That's been off source. And now they're completely on their own. Like it's difficult to know how I feel about that, because it gives me a different sense of sort of profound understanding for how horrible it must be to find yourself locked in a fucking cage with handcuffs on your wrist to go for a piss and like shitty food on a tray. And you didn't even, this is not your fault. It really isn't your fault. Like you did the movements, you made the actions to land yourself in there based on our societal understanding of what is right and wrong.
That's right.
You did not decide to do this. You have been dealt a hand that gives you a lack of information, knowledge, skills, and understanding to make decisions to not land yourself in there, and you're destined to go there and just fucking put up with it. Like that is horrible, really, to think about how helpless that must feel. And maybe that helpless.
But I can relate to what you just said in the sense from what does it mean to be Māori? And I'm going to go back to the Māori focus unit at the prison, and why I value working in there so much is that when you start to get your head around, because many men who go to prison who may identify as Māori probably don't know what that really means. They would get asked a question, ethnic background, and they might say, mum is from Samoa, dad is from, Ngāti, you might be from Tainui or Ngāpuhi or whatever. Anyway, so tick a box. So it's a very bureaucratic way of looking at people. But when you get to the Māori focus unit and you start to sort of understand the spirituality, and what an eye-opener in prison is how many men clutch Bibles, right? Which isn't really ringing my bell, because I don't believe that's done many Indigenous races around the world a lot of favors. Yeah. And so when you sort of look at, the weapon of choice that was used in terms of the colonization model, coming back to the spirituality, and what is so beautiful about it is that when you see a Māori man start to discover who he is, the material aspect of the world and the value of the family. And so your nutsack story, all of a sudden they start to want their whakapapa, and they start to want their ancestry. And we're not talking just, which waka they came off when they got here. We're going right back to the ultimate creator, whatever that is. So you're starting to believe that there is a bigger picture outside of, and and I'm not knocking Christianity or the Bible, but a lot of people will tell the story about how they found Jesus or whatever when they were in their cell one night. That's fine, but I still believe that's unfinished business in terms of your journey. And I think that the spiritual journey, and that's also ties back to the psychedelics a bit, the ability to let go and understand that we all came from somewhere, and our ancestors were probably, they weren't slaves. They probably were amazing people, very resilient, and we've lost a lot of that. So identity and a willingness to be considered a great ancestor one day. I want 4 generations down the track to think back about us and go, these dudes, they were on, and all we were doing was holding up the mantle to pass it on to the next lot. And so from a Māori perspective, I'm very optimistic about where we are today. A lot of people might look around and think that we're in a divisive environment. If we look at the Treaty Principles Bill and a lot of other stuff that's going on, but none of that stuff phases me at all, because I look at the young coming through, both Māori and non-Māori, and they're behaving more like treaty partners than any of our predecessors ever have. They're actually very objective. They're very, you will find more people under the age of 30 that will be able to recite to you the articles of Te Tiriti, where you could probably count on one hand in the neighbourhood I live in, the number of people, 7,500 people in Parnell. You probably struggle to find 6 or 7 that could. That's not a criticism to them, but that's where they came from. And so, New Zealand as a country, I think that we've got so much opportunity to evolve into an incredible place. And that's why I feel the privilege of going into a prison, because whilst on one hand, I know it's not right, I am realistic with probably not going to fix this in my lifetime or even yours. But we've got to start pointing the bow of our waka to where we want to be, and so, because it is a continuous journey, that's all it is.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well said. I think in terms of my little rant there was not a pro or an anti-religion. It's, I don't even know whether it's like spiritual in that way, and whether it's just like biologically how our brains actually work as a computer system. It's like you can get to that place of feeling bigger than you are. Anyone can do this at any point, right? There's a way to do that. I actually saw KRS-One, the rapper, talk about this, and he's become like a very prominent teacher. I watch a lot of his stuff in terms of mindset and sort of designing your reality and your thoughts become things and all this kind of stuff. But he's got one. We should do it now. So I'll count down 3, 2, 1, and when we get to 1, say your name but don't say it out loud. Okay, so just in your mind, just say your name. Okay, so 3, 2, 1. So what is that? Right, you said it, but you didn't say it. But you said your name and you heard it as well, but you didn't actually say it, so you didn't really hear it. But you said and heard your name and attached meaning to that, right, through a thought. And that he ultimately talks about that as like a 5th dimension, right? You've got like that is the source of where your ideas come from, right? You can talk and hear without any sound being made, right? And that's ultimately what thinking is. And it's like your whole environment. You move that plant. This podcast is different now because at the very beginning you decided to move that plant a little bit into the shop. Like everything around you is in its place and exists in your world because at some point you had a thought that had a meaning that dictated an action, and you bought something or you moved something or you didn't put something away and it's sitting in your environment now. So the same way that your current environment exists based on how you've thought, that means you can change it. But you have to first believe in that model, right? And I can understand how the guys you're talking to just couldn't even grasp that concept with what their reality is. Posters on the wall, sitting in a fucking small freezing cold box. Like, how can you even get to the point where you can sort of awaken yourself to the concept that you can redesign your life? Like, that is a privilege that we're lucky to have. But so how do you? I mean, how do you even start? What are the conversations you're even having?
Mm.
Even talk? How are you even talking to these guys?
Yeah. In terms of the men, and you've got those that are there for good, right? They ain't getting out.
Yeah.
So when you look at their file, there's no end date to their sentence. And then you've got those that are there that, they're a year or 2 years away from getting out. So your discussions vary from the nature of their sentence, but so there's two types of discussions that you're going to have. You're going to have those men that are motivated and they know they've screwed up. They're trying to hold on to their relationship and they're hoping their partner will stick with them. Because, man, if ever there was a sign when the relationship has fallen down, they won't come out of their cell. They'll hide under their blankets for 2 days. They look like, they've been on, a bender because she's under pressure. She can't put any money in the bank account anymore. So he can prop himself up in prison, blah, blah, blah. Then you've got the other dude that's moved on from that and they realize that this is their lot, right? So you've got that hardened, institutionalized, incarcerated guy that will teach you a lot about the prison system that you don't know. Then you've got the other guy that's beating themselves up every day because they ended up in here and they've got young kids and they get a visit, once a month or whatever, and they see what they've let down. So the discussions tend to reflect the dynamic of the individual that you're with. But the very best discussions are the ones where you realize that there's a bit of a relationship there and they start to open up about how they ended up in prison in the first place. And
It's therapy? Or is it like sitting across the table with a clipboard and you're just going, you can't do this when you get out? Like how deep are you really going in terms of like mentality and like programming their thoughts and stuff? Is it just like, how like therapeutic is it, I suppose, in terms of the nature of the conversation?
I think the only therapy that you're offering them is they're having a discussion that's probably a normal discussion compared to, prisoners will talk like prisoners and all of them will have a hustle in their own right. No disrespect to them, but you cannot blame them for trying to make their lag easier. So they will do anything they can to get whatever they can to make the misery that they find themselves in less miserable. So everything's got a hustle, everything's got a manipulative trait to it. And that's no disrespect to anybody. So when we're sitting opposite each other and it's a staff member on one side and a prisoner on the other, never underestimate the fact that what you are giving to them is free of all of that, right? So they're able to have a discussion with someone that's not coloured or filtered by what a prisoner will say to get what they want, right? And look, I don't think there's any prisoners that would disagree with what I've just said. So coming back to that exhaustive thing I mentioned earlier on when we started chatting, the therapy is that you're trying to leave something with that prisoner that would be a discussion they're not going to have with anybody else in here. So if there's like, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a mentor, but I'm somebody that would be able to give my lived experience because even though I'm not a prisoner, it's not my first rodeo. And I look around and I look at a lot of these men and I think, gee, how did I not get arrested and end up in prison at some point in my life? We've all been naughty, we've all done silly stuff, but somehow the gods have got something else in store for me. And so, yeah, I think the therapy is that it's a discussion that they're not going to have with anybody else and it doesn't come with any conditions. When I'm talking to a prisoner, I've got 60 to talk to, and some are very good at engaging, others are more shy, and will probably skirt around you or whatever because they still fuck 'em are, they're still embarrassed by the fact that they are a prisoner and you're not.
Yeah, and what you said about the mentality is interesting because you could even change the environment they come out to, right? If you imagine, that there's some incredible philanthropy investment where now every prisoner that gets released gets a load of money and a house and a completely different environment. They don't ever have to go back to where they're actually from. Their mentality is still flawed. So it won't make any difference. Now they'll just be looking at how they can get one over of the rich neighbors that are next door that leave their door unlocked all the time. And the mentality is still going to be there, right? So, so knowing that you're going to go back to those same environments and be around those influences and probably get straight back into gang life or get straight back into those stresses that you came from, got you in
Yeah.
there. It's got
Yeah.
you. mentality fix, hasn't it? Because
Well, that mentality is one of the beautiful things I've seen in the cultural focus unit, in the Māori focus unit, is that once you start to embrace tikanga, and once you start to understand who you are, um, you're not going to steal an inmate's lunch, right? Because if one lunch gets stolen in the Māori focus unit, we lock it down, right? Because we know that a cancer cell has somehow got into that unit, because no one will do that to each other. So the spiritual thing, and a lot of people might just say, well, those are just basic values or whatever. You want someone, when they go back out to society, are going to think about the consequences of what they do. And so, whereas someone that ends up in prison, they're prepared to take the risk of, well, whatever, and so I think that the coming back out and the risk of not reoffending again, not being a recidivist, is one of the big things that we're losing that war. We really are, but it's got to stop. We have to stop the rot at some point. And I'll probably I sort of want to leave you with this story, because I've told it a few times. When I first went to work in the prison system, I was pulled aside by one of the managers there that I really respect. He's a really insightful dude, and obviously been around a long time in terms of the prison system is concerned. And he said, when I saw your details come through, the first question I asked myself was, why is this guy here? And we were having a cup of coffee, and he said, I have to ask the question, why are you here? Because someone with a commercial background is probably more skewed to the hustle in terms of an ambition and being driven. What is the motivator for you to be in this prison? And I gave him an answer, and he sort of accepted that. But what it made me realize is my uniqueness, in terms of I'm probably not cut from the usual cookie cutter for someone working in the prison system, because I do look at it in a commercial sense. It's got mouth-watering contracts, and there are billions being bandied around to keep our communities safe and keep prisoners locked up. However, the bigger picture for me is, what can the environment that's on the outside of the wide, the business community, look at the prisons and go, we've got 11,000 prisons almost in prison right now, as you and I speak. How many of them are employable? How can we create a pathway? And there are release for work programs and things like that, but they are a drop in the bucket. I'm talking about an actual tax break for an employer to say, how many truck drivers have you got? How many computer programs? Whatever. Like, say, there's almost like a dynamic of an MSD might say they do this, corrections might say they do it, but a really effective recruitment company of going, right, we're going to profile every skill set you've got in there, and we're going to find, roles for them to do. I've seen a couple of very successful ones happen, and when I've looked at it, I've gone, how hard was that? It was actually good luck, not good management. That individual came out and can proudly look like you and I in the eye and say, yep, I spent 3 years in prison. This is what I did. This is what I learned, and I'm back. I'm getting my mana back. That's the sort of the bit that I look at it and go, well, when I go in every day, the eyes that I'm looking through are looking for those opportunities, but at the same time being realistic that you're inside a bureaucracy of about 9,000 staff, 11,000 prisoners. So it's not going to be a walk in the park. You're navigating, what is a very institutionalized environment.
Yeah, well put. And you're on the front lines there, doing your bit, right? Fighting the good fight. And I think, I guess we should probably leave it here, but I'll be really keen to do another one in the future and see how things have changed, new insights that you've got. But yeah, I think it's a random connection on LinkedIn, but I've really enjoyed talking to you. And I think you're just a really genuine guy. You're doing something you don't have to do. You could easily get plenty of well-paying jobs with your background in business and the commercial space, and but you're intrigued and curious about something that lots of people are intimidated by, and I'm sure it's scary, and I'm sure there's nerves, and we spoke last time about any fear you have of just involving yourself in this world, walking home or whatever. If you say someone doesn't like, does that follow you to your front door? But you're doing it anyway, and I think that's really admirable. And
Yeah, and I think that just from that perspective, if there are ancestors speaking to me, we Māori love a challenge, and we love an adventure, and that's exactly what this is for me.
Yeah, I think you're a bit of an unsung hero, and I hope you can get more visibility. We've spoken a little bit about how maybe we could collaborate on some stuff. But I do think the work you're doing's special and important and rare. And yeah, well done. Not that it means anything from a random dude in Nelson that you don't know, but
Thanks so much for your time, and I really appreciate you reaching out. It's been a real pleasure to kōrero.
thanks, man.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Catch you, bro.